Hey guys, welcome to Thrive Bites Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Colin Zhu, and thank you so much for listening on. You could have been anywhere in the world and you decided to spend just a few moments of your precious time, and we greatly appreciate it. Here on the podcast, we talk about three things: living a plant-powered lifestyle, enhancing emotional resilience, and creating a thriving mindset. And I interview a range of passionate guests such as physicians, dietitians, coaches, entrepreneurs, and many more. And please join me as I deliver these engaging, informative, and high-valued conversations for you. So what are you waiting for? Come on inside. Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Dr. Colin Zhu, and we have another episode for the podcast today. I'll be interviewing Dr. Jeff Matheson, who has a biochemical degree, and he's also a doctor of medicine in Canada, and is a great individual. He's here representing Pure Life Science, and we're going to be talking and unpacking all things omegas. And so you don't want to miss this. And as a disclaimer, please make sure that you consult your healthcare professional when you are trying out new things, especially supplementation. So you definitely want to have a chat with them. And without further ado, I'll see you guys inside. Okay, guys. Well, welcome to another episode of Thrive Bites Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Colin Zhu, and thank you so much for being here with us. You could have been anywhere in the world, and you decided to be here right at this moment, and we greatly appreciate it. Today, I have a wonderful guest with us today. His name is Dr. Jeff Matheson, and he is a fantastic guest that's going to be on the show. And basically, he has several degrees behind his name. He has a honors and bachelor of science in biochemistry from the University of Western Ontario. He's also a doctor of medicine, master of surgery from McGill University. And he has practiced medicine in ER departments across Canada, internationally, as well as Ontario, Abu Dhabi, and the United Arab Emirates. He was appointed medical director of Med Emergent Inc. in 1998, dedicated for underserved hospitals in Canada. In 2013, he co-founded an all-natural migraine and headache center, which he is promoting non-narcotic approaches to pain and headaches. And Dr. Matheson has traveled extensively throughout Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia. And according to him, traveling is the best education. And I can't wait to dive deeper into that with him because I also love to travel as well. And his personal model is that a practitioner's ability to listen and empathize with his patients is key to establishing an accurate diagnosis and developing long-term effective treatment solutions to optimizing a patient's health and outcomes. And he has a current role in Pure Life Science, which is producing omega-3 solutions for the community. And that's what we're going to interview him today. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Jeff to the stage. Hello.
Hi there. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here with us. I know you're a busy individual. Can you tell the audience where you're calling from today?
I'm calling from the sunny climes of Toronto under multiple feet of snow.
multiple feet.
Yes.
I noticed that you didn't say meters.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I was born before the time of the metric system. I remember we had to convert in grade 5. That's how old I am. So yeah, I still think of everything in feet and inches.
Honestly, the best thing aha moment for me was knowing how to convert Fahrenheit to Celsius and vice versa. And that was like, yes, I can finally, do this in my head and not needing, a calculator. And now we have artificial intelligence. So. So Dr. Jeff, there's a great company that you represent, and we're going to dive deeper into that. But I want you to orient to the audience who you are, a little bit about your origin story in terms of how, what got you into the medical sciences, what got you into your current role today. So for those of the audience that, don't know about you, can you help us orient yourself, please?
I graduated back in the early 90s from medical school and sort of was going to do internal medicine at that time. And then I decided, you didn't want to be really married to the hospital first. And so I decided to get out and start working. And I found I really enjoyed emergency room work. And so delved dove into that and sort of did that full time for 18 years. So, and Emerge is a great education, because one thing about working in the emergency room, every time you think you know everything, something comes up and bites you and, and puts you in your place, right? So it's a very humbling experience.
Mm.
Then I got into chronic pain management about 22 years ago now, or maybe even more now, because it was my kids were getting to be school age, and an Emerge lifestyle is a lot of evenings, nights, weekends, so you didn't see your kids very much, and this is all daytime work. But I realized that pain management in Canada at that time was sort of the Wild West, anything goes sort of thing. And so I gathered a group of my colleagues together, and we decided to start a company that had a more systematic approach to pain management, and had more of the Emerge standards that I was used to. So we introduced, defibrillation machines into the clinics, and oxygen and all that sort of stuff, which was, that didn't exist before. And that became the standard that all pain clinics are now held to in Canada. And so it was interesting having a piece of that. But then in around 2012 or so, 2013, I began to realize that, we're going down this pharmaceutical pathway, and nobody was getting back to work. So you'd see all these chronic pain patients, and no one got better, right? And the doses kept escalating and escalating and escalating. And of course, we know that it was the middle of the OxyContin thing, which, I got all the lectures, and they told, oh, don't worry, it's not addicting, locked-acting forms, it's fine. And then it's like, no, within 3 weeks, patients are asking for more and more and more. I decided that I was going to break away from that, because I went through a personal experience myself. I always thought that, when you got near 50, you had all these aches and pains that cropped up. And so I actually went down a nutritional pathway, and I got rid of a bunch of, like I had a ganglion cyst in my wrist. I had all these feeling tired all the time. I lost 20 pounds, 6 inches in my waist. My energy level was way up. So I actually tried it with a few of my patients. I said, why don't you try this regime and see if it works for you? And I had 8 patients lose over 100 pounds each and come off 80% of their medications. And I said, well, that's not something they teach you in medical school. So then I delved down, and I started researching why was this working. And basically, I was mostly relearning what I sort of forgotten in biochemistry, because medical school is very good for breeding some of that stuff out of you, right? And so I actually decided to start down another degree for the health and wellness in the American Academy for Anti-Aging, right? A4M. And I was reviewing some old interviews and lectures of all these guys who had all these biohacks and stuff like that. And I ran into an interview with a guy who was actually an engineer from MIT, his story was that his wife became diabetic, and despite doing everything the doctors wanted her to, she got worse. She eventually had a brainstem stroke and ended up in a wheelchair. And so he, instead of getting mad at the medical profession, started doing research into diabetes, and it led him into the lipid biochemistry world, which is something that I had done in my undergrad. And then I realized that guy was right. And so when I introduced the product to my business partner, he was 60 at the time, and he was still playing competitive hockey. And he phones me up and he says, what the hell's in this stuff? He says, I'm now out skating all the 30-year-olds on my team. And then when I got more and more into the research, I realized why it was doing it. And that's led to the whole development of the Pure Life Science and the marketing of Pure Form Omega the way it is today. So that's sort of how I got to where I am now, right? So I get, we all reach that point. I don't know, when you practice allopathic medicine, we all get to the point where we realize this is not working, right? And now I realize just getting people healthier is way better than and way more effective than any medication I've ever used.
Before I segue into that, so most of your training and schooling was in Canada, correct?
Yes, it was.
Okay. So, I'm in America, and, on this podcast, we talk a lot about, I've had a lot of doctors on the show, and we talk about and reminisce and lament our training and schooling, and how much there was a paucity of nutritional education. And what was that like? Was that similar for Canadian training as well at that time?
Yeah, it was. I think we got one 45-minute lecture on nutrition, right?
Mm,
Like that was it.
that was
And
worse than me.
yeah, and it's crazy because even when I first started down this pathway of getting patients healthier, I had doctors telling me that, nutrition has nothing to do with health, and you're going,
Wow.
what? It's funny. I remember when the World Health Organization tried to change the definition of health. Health is generally defined as the absence of disease.
Mm.
They tried to change it to health is defined as on 2 medications or less.
That's from a cost cost effectiveness. That's actually pretty good because you're not burdening the system.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, do you agree with that? Is health, the absence of disease?
Yeah, I think it is, right. I think that's a fair definition. And if you look at most diseases that we see today, there's definitely a nutritional component to it now. I mean, people are morbidly obese not because they're eating too much, it's because they're actually starving themselves and they're eating so much empty calorie food, they're accumulating weight with no nutrition.
Mm.
If from what I've learned, if you eat nutrient dense foods, you lose weight like crazy because
Mhm.
your body doesn't need all that stuff,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
it's a I always like how nature works, right? And I would always talk about the dinosaurs. So dinosaurs grew very large, but at that time, the Earth atmosphere had lots of carbon dioxide. Plants grew very fast, but then they were nutritionally very poor, right?
Mhm.
So you had to eat lots of them to get the nutrition from it. So of course the animals grew very large to get enough plants to get their nutrition. And
Uh-huh.
if you think of it that way, you can understand why these morbidly obese people are they're eating all the time but not getting any nutrition. So of course, what their bodies keep telling them to eat more and more and more, right? And if they just ate or had nutritionally dense stuff, we would all that problem would just vanish, would just go.
Mhm. Yeah, I've interviewed farmers on this
Mhm.
podcast as well, and 99% of what we practice agriculturally in the United States is modern agriculture, and
Mhm.
a lot of it is our tax dollars are paid towards government subsidies, which pretty much just fund subsidizing, just less than a handful of crops,
Mhm.
plant species,
Correct.
and that's corn, that's wheat, soybeans, rice, things like that. And it's not the most nutritionally, dense. It mostly
No.
goes towards animal livestock.
Mhm.
But what was very poignant about that interview was that, I was interviewing a regenerative, sustainable farmer. And he says that our current soil health is 60% less and deficient of nutrition than where it was 50 years ago. And
Okay.
so, basically an apple, 50 years ago would be the equivalent of like 7 or 8 apples today. But going back to Canada, I really appreciated when the food guide came out. I really appreciated that because you just mentioned nutrient dense, and I thought to myself, wow, that's a really robust plate. Right.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you've been following, our dietary guidelines
Oh,
over the years, but it's
it's
historically been abysmal.
oh, yeah. Well, there's so much influence. It's unbelievable. I mean,
Yeah.
having Fruit Loops at the top and hamburger at the bottom, like what? I mean, that just defies logic. I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't. It literally makes no sense. And you're like going, I don't know how an organization of any sort could put out a guide that looks like that.
Uh, yeah, I mean, nowadays I just say money talks and follow the money,
Oh, but
So,
well, it's getting so obvious, right? It's so obvious now.
yeah,
Just,
I mean,
just
if it doesn't get any more obvious than someone smacking you across the face, I don't know what will people up.
yeah.
So yeah, so basically going back to how you've kind of developed the fort. So so tell me, give me a little snapshot. Who founded the company? Were you involved with founding, or did you contribute with the formulation of the products?
Yeah, so I found the product, but I didn't formulate it. But I recognized what it did, and I also knew that their marketing was terrible. And so we founded the company together with my partner John to try and give it a wider audience and try and promote why it works. Because the one of the issues is education, right? And we're inundated with stuff about fish oil all the time, and and biochemically it's not right, but there's a lot of money behind it. it was all based on a paper that came out in '76 and was very bad science, but it solved a problem for the fishing industry, right? So I remember when the fishing trawlers would go out and they would clean the fish and they'd throw all the livers and stuff overboard, and of course there's millions of seagulls following these boats around. And then they suddenly said, "Oh no, we can use the oil." So suddenly they had a purpose for one of the discarded products that they had before. So there's an excess of fish oil around, and it's very cheap to produce, but it fundamentally doesn't make any sense. Right?
Yeah, I mean, and from an environmental standpoint, I'm a certified scuba diver, and I've also had the privilege of traveling to Antarctica. And what you learn is that, sustainably, from a sustainable standpoint, it just disrupts the entire food chain. And then it also destroys, ecosystems. Now we know that, overfishing globally, fishery will collapse if we don't do anything by like 2050 is what some experts are estimating. So from an ecological standpoint, it's just abysmal. It's just really.
Yeah. I know there are regions of the ocean now that are like deserts, right? There's just nothing there, right? And you have to protect a large area to allow the species to regenerate. You just can't pillage.
You can't just exactly. You can't pillage things that are just empty and devoid, right? Yeah. So let's go back to the science of it, right? So tell me inherently what is wrong? You have mentioned fish oil, like it's just, it's just not good, right? Can you break it down for us? Like what about it, is just not.
Well, one of the problems, of course, is the term omega itself. Omega is just a biochemical naming term, right? It actually doesn't mean anything. So when you have a fatty acid is a long chain of carbons put together and has a carboxyl end and it has a methyl end, right? So the carboxyl end is the actual alpha end, and the methyl end, which has got the carbon with the 3 hydrogens on it, is the omega end. And when they say omega-3, they mean that the first double bond in the fatty acid chain is at the 3 carbons. So you count 1, 2, 3, that's an omega-3. If it's an omega-6, it's at the 6th position. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But it doesn't tell you anything about the rest of the chain. So it doesn't tell you if it's 16 carbons, 18 carbons, 20, 22. And that makes a big difference because these things are certain lengths for a reason because of what they do. And it turns out, of course, our cell membranes are made of the 18 carbon fatty acid chains, whereas fish oils are 20 and 22 carbon fatty acid chains. The other problem is that fish oils have 5 and 6 double bonds in them. So when you put a double bond in a fatty acid, it gets more volatile. Okay, it's very much more unstable. Whereas the omegas that are in our structure have 1 and 2 double bonds. They're much more stable. And the reason that is that fish don't live at room temperature. They live in the ocean where it's nearly freezing. If they had our fatty acids in them, they would be just free. They become blocks of ice. Not very good for their survival. So they need those highly unsaturated or highly unstable fats in them to prevent freezing. We don't need it. We live at 98 degrees Fahrenheit. We need more stable fatty acids. And so, when you think about it in those terms, it makes more sense why we need more of our type of omegas, which are from plants, which live above, they live on the ground. They live in our environment. We never lived in the ocean. Right.
Well, I did see an article that there is going to be an actual underwater city that's going to be developing.
That's great. Talk to me.
Until then,
a couple of million years of living down there, maybe you'll adapt. United States moves pretty slow. It doesn't move that fast.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. Thank you so much for breaking that down. I literally just time traveled back to my, university days right now of like organic chemistry and all that. So no, it does make a lot of sense. So when you say that it is unstable, so when that happens within the human body, like what happens? Like what can be the risk and complications that result from that? Well, short term, long term.
Yeah. Well, so what you're doing is once you ingest it, first of all, it heats up to your body temperature, which makes it more unstable. So it's much more likely to oxidize. And then it's exposed to the acid in your stomach. And so it's completely oxidized by the time it ever gets in your system. So it actually becomes much more dangerous for you. And your body has to use up a lot of resources to to deal with it, because you're giving it, you think about it, the amount in a fish oil capsule is many times the amount you would ever need in the human body. We do need little bit of it, okay, but much less than what we're being promoted. It's like milligram amounts, not grams, right? So we're literally taking 50 to 100 times overdose every time we take a fish oil capsule, and your body has to deal with the consequences of that. So, and you'll see it in people, like people who have lots and lots of age spots and stuff like that. That's actually oxidized fish fatty acids in your skin and stuff. So your body is trying to sequester that stuff anywhere it can.
Yeah. And then add on top of that, in America, we have a, vegetable and fruit deficiency. Only 10% of Americans actually get the recommended servings of plant food. So when you're not getting enough vegetables and fruits, then you are inherently not getting enough antioxidants, which is slowing down that oxidative, process. Yeah, that's very enlightening. You have this huge industry that got built up, right? And then here you guys, come along and you decided to do something different. So walk me along the pathway of what kind of findings that you alluded to in the early stages, and what have you guys kind of evolved to today?
Sure. So early on, it's like, okay, so obviously we knew we had a good product, but how do you got to find your niche, right? You can blow your brains out and raise $1 billion and do a massive ad campaign, and it might still fail, right? So we had said, well, what's our niche? How can we promote this? And it was very interesting. So in my practice, I had a couple patients that cropped up. One of them was a guy that who was type 1 diabetic, but he had a liver pancreas transplant. And so he was no longer type 1 diabetic, but he still had vascular compromise of his feet. He was limping. And I said, so what's going on? He says, well, I have a non-healing diabetic ulcer in my foot, and they're going to amputate my foot. And I said, so I gave him the omegas, and I said, what this does is increases oxygenated tissue. Please take it and tell me what happens. 5 weeks later, he comes back and he says, they canceled my surgery. Right? Wow. 5 weeks. So then I said, oh, okay, I haven't seen that happen before. So then I had another patient who came in. She was screaming because she actually had a cold, dead right leg from a blood clot. And they wanted to amputate her leg. And she says, yeah, I will do anything not to get this leg amputated. And I said, take these, please. And literally again, 4 weeks later, they canceled her surgery. Her leg was warm again.
Do you administer just the way it's instructed, or were these patient cohorts given like higher doses?
I think we gave them a little bit higher doses than the normal. It's a weight-based dosing, so but it will work on the weight-based dosing. I have a friend whose mother's 100, and she has recurrent pressure sores from being in a wheelchair, and she goes on 4 of them a day, and every time within a couple of weeks they're healed. Right, 100 years old. That's not supposed to happen.
Yeah, that's amazing. Especially with the diabetic ulcers, those are just gnarly. I've worked in centers with hyperbaric chambers. We worked with wound care teams, and it's just the amount of resources to just manage just the lower limb is mind-boggling.
Yeah, we actually approached one of the diabetic wound specialists in the States. He's very well renowned, and said, this is what our initial findings were. Do you have any interest? And he says, oh yeah, just talk to my associate and whatever. And he says, oh yeah, well, you can do a study on our patients. It'll be $5,000 a patient though. And I'm going, okay, that's so to get a decent study, you're talking about $1 million for a small startup. That's not going to happen. But this it's still all about the money, right? And if you look at even him, he's a plastic surgeon who specializes in diabetes, and he lectures all over the place, but he's sponsored by the big companies, and they're all into the lasers and hyperbarics and all these expensive wound dressings and stuff like that. But I mean, it's still, surgeons only make money when they cut, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's
is the industry, big pharma, is it just as prominent in Canada as it is here?
Oh yeah, it is. It's now more so. It's very disappointing that even my alma mater, McGill, accepted hundreds of millions of dollars from pharmaceutical companies in the States. So basically, they've been bought, and I think we see it today because I don't know if you've noticed, but I've noticed all the younger physicians, they just go off protocols. They don't really talk to patients any longer, right?
Mm,
They just say, what's their problem? And then, oh, here's the protocol, right?
mm.
And I think that's one of the problems, the frustration I see and my patients see is that they're dealing with the medical industry now and not getting any answers because they don't fit into the protocols.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really annoying and frustrating. I totally understand. Let's break down in terms of ratios and omegas. And what we hear and understand are 3, 6s, and 9s. And
Yeah.
from my understanding, when we're talking and referring to the standard American diet, you're talking about, a type of diet where it's very animal based, very
Mhm.
animal heavy, and then a lot of ultra processed foods.
Mhm.
And so in America, heart disease, cancer, they're always top 2 year after year and a year. And what we now know is that more than half of the top 10 causes of death in America are associated heavily with dietary and lifestyle changes. So that begs a question in terms of, what is going on, nutritionally speaking, in this, realm that we're here is, biochemically, right? So if we're talking about 3, 6s, and 9s, what is happening when we're eating something that is more animal-based heavy and more ultra-processed in terms of omega ratios? Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, so it's the ultra processing is a big problem, right? To understand how the product works, you have to go back to the work of Otto Warburg. So I don't know, you probably heard of Otto Warburg. He was probably the greatest biochemist of the 20th century. Worked in Germany in the 40s and 30s, 40s, and 50s. He was part Jewish. He was allowed to stay in Berlin and keep his research going because Hitler's mother died of cancer, and he was the major cancer investigator of the day. But because of that, a lot of his work got suppressed because, obviously what happened after the war and stuff like that. So, but there's something called the Warburg effect. So the Warburg effect shows he was able to demonstrate if you took a culture of human cells and you deprived them of oxygen about 30 to 35%, even intermittently, they would turn cancerous. Okay. And so he theorized that oxygen delivery had everything to do with cancer. Now, what's very interesting about the omega-6, which we're all accused of having too much in our diet, omega-6, the pure unadulterated omega-6, linoleic acid, actually has the same oxygen dissociation curve as hemoglobin. So this is really important. The reason that omega-6 is so important and why it's so found so much in all the natural world is it actually is the fat that's in the cell membrane that carries the oxygen from the hemoglobin to the mitochondria where it's used to produce energy. Now, what happens when you have a processed food diet is that you have a lot of the corn oil, canola oil, soy oil, all that garbage, right? That thing is heated multiple times, and therefore it loses its oxygen carrying capacity. So when it gets into your cell membranes, it acts like a barrier, right? So now you're getting less oxygen to the cell. Well, what does the Warburg effect teach us? Then it's much more likely to become cancerous. And what have we seen since processed oils have been in our diets starting in about 1912 when Crisco came on the market? Heart disease and cancer rates have exploded since that time. I always go by an interesting story. There was Dwight Eisenhower when he was president, he had a heart attack, right? And he wasn't able to be president for about a 6-week period of time while he recovered. His cardiologist, Dr. White, got his fellowship in cardiology when in 1920. He did not see his first heart attack until 1928. He's a cardiologist. So it just goes to show you how rare heart attacks were back when we had a much more, farm to table diet, and we had no chemicals in the environment. We didn't process our foods. Then Crisco came on the market. It was kind of the first adulterated fat that was introduced in the diet. Well, margarine, I guess, was invented by during the Napoleonic War, but it was sort of the first mass-produced thing because it was shelf-stable. It wouldn't rot, right? Bacteria wouldn't eat it, right? But it made light, flaky pie crusts and stuff like that. So before you knew it, by 1920, Crisco was everywhere. And then within 10 or 15 years, heart attacks and cancer rates started exploding. Right? And so you think about it, it's all fats are the basis of all life. Your cell membrane is the basis of all life. And so what we do is we're screwing around with our membrane composition it's leading to relative oxygen deficiency of our cells, which is giving us cancer and heart disease. It's not necessarily the animal heavy diet. We're feeding the animals crap too, right? And of course, if you eat an animal that's been fed crap, you're eating the crap the animal ate too.
Correct.
So you eat a sick animal, it's going to make you sick. So
yeah,
right. It's that. So we have to get back to regenerative farming, right? That's what it is. Got to restore the soil. Got to get more nutrient dense products in their thing. And even if we do eat animals, they should be fed a nutrient dense diet as well, because if they get sick, we're going to get sick. So.
Yeah, I think it really just comes down to, like I said in the beginning, like you follow the money.
For
and
sure.
and then you look at the industries and figure out, who's profiting and who can afford not, to not have that process stopped, right? Having that flow of money. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so many things to kind of unpack there. So it almost seems like, if there's a barrier and it creates an oxygen deficiency, that almost sounds like an oxidative process. Like it's just going just deficiencies of just the natural resources, that it needs. And I think it comes back to the processedness of it, right? Having things ultra processed and adulterating it. And for me, whenever I treat patients, I'm a GP, whenever I talk to my patients, I say, yes, the patient that comes to me, I have to cater to all of them. They fall along a spectrum. And you kind of have to meet them where they're at. And so I tell them, well, you do what you can, right? You cater to patients from different, socioeconomic classes. And you tell them that, you want to get to a certain North Star. And our North Star is eating foods that are, whole, intact, as much as Mother Nature intended it to be, right? So if it didn't grow out of the ground, off of a vine, off of a tree, then you would try not to, mess with it. And everything after that is basically, man has, you're using your words, adulterated it. So basically, your body just doesn't really recognize it, right? And it responds and reacts the way that it does. And so when people are just kind of used in this current era, when people are just used to, food as in a package, they're used to seeing food in a box, they're used to seeing food on a shelf, right? And so I think that's what comes back to, going back to the origins of it and understanding that disconnect. And so that's what we're, trying to do. If you think about different types of health, industries, right? We have the food and beverage industry, we have the weight loss industry, supplement industry. There's a lot of things where you have to be careful in terms of how, you have to understand your body. I think at the end of the day, it's like the more you understand your body, the more, more awareness you have in terms of, like you just said, is my body and what it does over time being hijacked, right? And I think, our dopamine reward pathways and that center of the brain is probably the most that it's being hijacked, and even things that are not nutrition related in terms of screen time, in terms of social media, right? Our attention is being hijacked, right? Going back to the supplement that you guys have, created, I have a bottle. I've been, taking it for a few years. And what I like about it is it's easy on the belly. It doesn't really give you a lot of like bad aftertaste. It's really gentle. I haven't had any, side effects from it. And, I'll read off the ingredients. You have flax oil here, you have evening primrose, you have pumpkin, high linoleic sunflower, and then extra virgin coconut. How did you decide on these ingredients?
So, evening primrose oil is probably one of the more important ones. It's called the King's Cure-All, right? So the one thing about evening primrose oil is it's got also a high amount of GLA in it, or gamma linoleic acid. And if you look at the fatty acid cascade, gamma linoleic acid forces the cascade down to produce what's called PGE1, or prostaglandin E1. And that's actually the most potent anti-inflammatory the body makes. So what's key to the evening primrose oil component of it is that it causes a very strong anti-inflammatory reaction very quickly. So it makes you feel good faster. So if you talk to anybody who takes it and they have arthritic knees or hips or whatever, they start taking it, they notice a difference within a few days, if not sooner. Okay. The flaxseed oil, of course, is to get the omega-3 component in there, because flaxseed is more omega-3 dominant. The pumpkin seed oil, of course, is omega-6, but actually has some other things in it that are actually really good for you. Highlight sunflower oil is mostly the omega-6, and the coconut oil is mostly a saturated fat, so it helps stabilize it a little bit. But the key to why the product's so good is that it's processed under a blanket of nitrogen, so it's never exposed to oxygen. And that bubble you see in the capsule is a bubble of nitrogen. So it's all preserved naturally. And so when it's never exposed to oxygen, it's like you've picked it from the ground and eaten it yourself. That's about as close as we could get, right? And that's why it's so effective, because it's totally unprocessed. It's cold pressed and it's under a blanket of nitrogen. And so it's done in a pharmaceutical grade factory. That's one of the reasons why it's not the cheapest thing to produce.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you take us through the understanding of what does cold press means, right? You hear this a lot with vegetable oils and things like that. So is it just, not applying heat to it to be able to extract it? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, the cold press, the temperature has to be kept, and I have to brush up on it, but I think it's around the maximum temperature the press can get to is around 70 or 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's considered cold pressing. The problem when you heat things up, you make them more unstable, right? And so they get much more reactive. To give you an example of reactivity, so McDonald's used to cook their French fries in beef tallow. When they switched over to canola oil or vegetable oil, anybody who has a deep fryer will know this. What they started doing at scene was there's an accumulation of this hard waxy stuff on the wall that you have to keep cleaning off, right? And people. And that's because these fryers are working at higher temperatures, and the oil is converting to formaldehyde, and they're actually aldehydes that are sticking to your wall. Well, formaldehyde, as you know, as a physician, is what you preserve dead bodies with, not something you want to be ingesting, right? So when you let things heat up, these things get double bonds in them. They'll react with other things, and they form these chemicals that you don't necessarily want to have in your system. And so that's why that's the key to cold pressing. That's why cold pressing is so important, because these expellers, if they're not kept cool, they will heat up because they're friction, right? So if you let them heat up, then you're going to start getting chemical reactions you don't want in there, and then you're going to get contamination you don't want.
What are some customer testimonials? Like, what have you seen over the years?
Oh, there's so many of them. One of the most brilliant ones, other than the wound healing stuff, which we have quite a few testimonials. I had a girl that we met who was a waitress, and she had sickle cell anemia. So she was bent over in terrible pain, but she had to work because she had to make a living. She was like 21, 22, something like that. And she was on high dose fentanyl and OxyContin and all this sort of stuff. And so we chatted with her, and she basically, her hips were degrading. She's going to need both hips replaced, and that's why she was walking so bent over. And we just gave her some bottles and said, please just try this and see and tell us what you think. Within 3 weeks, she emailed me back and said she was off all of her medications. And then, sickle cell is an oxygen problem, right? Anyone who's a physician knows. But when people with sickle cell anemia, when they're exposed to low oxygen environments, their blood cells tend to get sickle shaped, and then they don't fit through the capillaries, and then they start clotting off little bits of themselves, and that's why they have the sickle cell crisis, which they're in so much pain. It's mostly that deep bone pain. Well, when she got on the pure form, obviously we increased the oxygen that she was getting, and then she wasn't having those crises anymore, and she was oxygenating all her tissues, so she was able to get off all her pain management medications. And that's a phenomenal turnaround there. And we've had people with a lot of different problems. We had even people with like Crohn's disease and things like that. They settled down quite quickly. The anti-inflammatory properties. One of my favorite stories, because I know I'm rambling on, but one of my favorite stories is one of my patients had a chocolate lab that was 14 years old that had arthritic hips, and it couldn't go up and down the stairs any longer. And I said, give the pure form to the dog, see what happens. 2 weeks later, the dog's running up and down the stairs, going on for long walks, and it says it can't believe how different the dog is. And so the dog's not going to lie.
It's true.
All right. So, so that was one of my favorites. And people have seen old dogs with their bad hips and stuff like that. If you can turn a dog's life around, imagine you can turn a human's life around. Right?
Yeah. I have a couple of questions left before we close out. What about sources of algae? I heard that, omegas, do find omegas within fish oil. They actually get their omegas from algae. Is that true? And if so, have you thought about sourcing algae as a plant-based source?
Well, algae can be used for the very little DHA that you may need, because a lot of our contamination in our food and stuff actually block the delta 5 desaturase pathway slightly, so you can get around it. Algae, of course, makes the DHA and EPA, so it makes the highly unsaturated fatty acids the problem in the first place. So algae oil by itself is of very little benefit to us. So we need the 18 carbon ones, which are only from land-based plants. Okay, and what's really fascinating about all of this is that people don't realize that 99+% of the omegas in the plants you eat actually go straight into your cell membrane structure. They don't go down the fatty acid cascade. So that's why we need such a fraction of DHA and EPA that we say we do. Even in our brains, we don't make that much, and it's highly conserved, which means it's a steady state reaction. So if you need some, your body will make it, but it'll only make enough till you're satisfied. But the rest of it stays in the 18 carbon state. So we don't. It's a structure, it's a cell membrane structure. So we're dealing with the cell membrane structure, and remember, nature doesn't do anything. One thing is all not for one purpose, right? The membrane has both structure and it has a function. So its structure is to separate, inside from outside, but its function is to transport oxygen to a mitochondria to produce energy. And that's the one thing that most doctors don't understand about cell membranes is what they actually do, right?
Yeah. No, I totally understand. My last question is, have you noticed any complications when taking the formulation or any side effects? And which demographics or groups of people is it not for?
Okay, so almost everybody can take it. So we've had patients with very rare genetic diseases and stuff, and they do just fine on it. I've not run into anybody who can't take it. The only thing we've ever run into is sometimes people have a Herx reaction, the Herxheimer reaction. So when you make their cells healthier, they start kicking out toxins, which can make them feel terrible. So sometimes I'll dose them on the lower side and build up their dosing gradually, because we're very toxic people now. We carry around a lot of stuff in our bodies, and so when you make the cell healthier, what happens is, of course, it starts wanting to kick out those toxins, and then it floods your system and can make you feel pretty awful. And that's true of a lot of different health supplements, that sort of these cleanses and things like that. You probably know, when you use chelators and things like that, you can have these Herx reactions, HERX, right? Herxheimer.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I've really seen.
Gotcha.
I've really. Some people say they have allergies to certain things. What I do is I say, look, if you think you really have an allergy to any of the ingredients, because the coconut or whatever, take some of the oil and just put it on your hand, because put a hole in the capsule and just put it on your hand and see what happens over the next 15-20 minutes. If you don't react to it, then you're probably fine.
Yeah. Okay, and that's good to know. People that are interested, where can we find you guys?
Yeah, so our website, purelifescience.com. I've got lots of blogs and lots of information there. You can order the product from the website. We do sell it to some naturopaths and things like that, but it's mostly done online. There is a code, I believe, for viewers of the podcast, which I'm just trying to find here. I can't find it, but anyway, you have it somewhere, I think.
Yeah. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that's and of course I still work my pain practice. I have a clinic just outside of Toronto that I see my headache and migraine patients at, and whiplash, car accidents, concussions, things like that. But I do an all natural approach, so you won't get too much prescribing from me.
Gotcha. Well, Dr. Jeff, it's been a pleasure, talking to you. Thank you for taking me back to school.
Yeah, it is amazing. That's all it really is, right? It's amazing that we've learned all of this, And then, what happens, you learn all of it. And then when you get out in the real world, all you do is get visits from pharmaceutical reps and going to pharmaceutical dinners and all that. I mean, you've lived it.
Mm-hmm.
And you really have to, that stuff is valuable information that we learned back then. And the other thing we have to realize is that all the studies that are being done today are heavily influenced. I mean, even the New England Journal of Medicine, the editor, when she retired from there, said that 93% of what was published there is complete rubbish. And so it's interesting, all the best research in lipid biochemistry for sure was done in the 50s and 60s, right? And then those studies are just as valid today as they were then.
Probably because not so much of the corporate interest back in the day.
Well, those grants, if you don't find the right result, good luck getting the grant next year.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time. Guys, this has been another episode of Thrive Bites Podcast. If you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you felt that this was a benefit for someone else, you let them know. And until then, please say goodbye to Dr. Jeff. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Hey guys, we hope you enjoy that episode. If you like that, please like, comment, and subscribe. And please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, and anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. And if you felt that this was a benefit for someone else, please let them know. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating, and we greatly appreciate it. And we'll see you on the next one.